12 species had died in that chamber before lunch. The gallery crowds barely noticed anymore. Executions on the tribunal ring were as common as breathing, and most ended within seconds. The accused would scream, collapse, and stop moving. Simple, clean, boring to S.O. when the guards dragged a human into the circular chamber. Nobody expected entertainment. Humans were new to the galaxy. Small creatures from a small world. The betting pools gave him 8 seconds. Danny Reeves looked around the chamber with the calm expression of a man who had already accepted that his day was ruined. He was 34 years old, built like someone who had spent his life carrying heavy things in difficult places and currently regretting every decision that had led him to this moment. His cargo ship had drifted into restricted space during a navigation failure. Now he was going to die for it. The transparent walls showed hundreds of alien faces watching from tiered galleries. Some were eating, others were chatting among themselves. A few glanced at him with mild curiosity before returning to their conversations. High Arbiter Nolan entered through a door that appeared in the seamless wall. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in dark chitinous plates that clicked softly when he moved. Compound eyes reflected Danny's image back at him from a dozen angles. The Kathrani were feared across 100 systems. They had conquered worlds not through weapons, but through environmental control. They could make any planet uninhabitable. They could make any room a death trap. Human vessel designation Wanderer's Luck, Nolan announced, his voice translated through speakers that made it sound almost pleasant. You entered Kathrani restricted space. The penalty is death. Danny cleared his throat. The navigation computer failed. I filed the repair reports. This was an accident. Irrelevant. Nolan's mandibles clicked together. The tribunal does not consider intent. Only action. You trespassed. UD. Right. Danny looked around the chamber again. And how exactly does this work? The question seemed to amuse several spectators. A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the galleries. Nolan's compound eyes shifted in a pattern that suggested satisfaction. The tribunal ring uses survival trials. I will create conditions that should kill you. If you survive for 1 hour, you go free. If you die, justice is served. He paused. No accused has ever survived. Danny nodded slowly. And what conditions are you planning? Your species evolved on a world with approximately 1 standard gravity unit. Nolan's voice carried the tone of a teacher explaining something simple to a particularly slow student. Fragile, weak, dependent on specific environmental conditions. He gestured with one segmented limb. I will increase gravity until your bones shatter and your organs rupture. Most species die within seconds. I expect you will last perhaps 10. The galleries buzzed with anticipation. Danny saw money changing hands in the crowd. The odds were not in his favor. 1 hour, Danny repeated. If I survive 1 hour, I go free. Correct. But you will not survive 1 hour. You will not survive 1 minute. Nolan moved to a control panel embedded in the wall. Let us begin. The gravity shifted. Danny felt it immediately. His body became heavier, his movements slower. The sensation was like wearing a weighted vest, except the weight was inside him. His blood felt thick. His lungs worked harder to expand. 1.5 standard gravity units, Nolan announced. Most galactic species would already be struggling. Danny was struggling, but he had felt worse. He remembered carrying equipment up mountain trails in northern Canada, where the air was thin and the weight on his back seemed to double with every step. He remembered working the mining rigs with his father, hauling loads that made his muscles scream and his joints ache. That he sat down. The movement was deliberate. Cross-legged on the cold floor, hands resting on his knees. The position distributed the extra weight more evenly across his body. Nolan's compound eyes flickered. What are you doing? Getting comfortable. Danny reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small bag. Inside were pieces of dried fruit. Mango mostly. He had bought them at the last station because they reminded him of home. He popped one into his mouth and chewed. The galleries went silent. Then confused murmuring spread through the crowd like ripples in water. The betting pools adjusted rapidly. Several aliens demanded their money back. Danny held up the bag toward the transparent barrier. Want some? They're pretty good. Nolan stared at him. The Arbiter had executed thousands of beings in this chamber. None of them had ever offered him a snack. You are attempting to appear brave, Nolan said finally. It will not save you. I'm attempting to eat my lunch, Danny replied. You interrupted me. The gravity increased to 2 standard units. Danny felt his spine compress. Breathing became more deliberate. But he kept chewing, kept swallowing, kept reaching into the bag for another piece that in the galleries, a young amphibian named Prill leaned forward in her seat. Her species came from a low-gravity moon. Even standard gravity made her uncomfortable. She could not imagine surviving what this human was experiencing, and yet he was eating dried fruit like he was waiting for a bus. 2.5 units, Nolan announced, his voice carrying a new edge. Danny lay back on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. His chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. The bag of dried fruit rested on his stomach. Hey, he called out, his voice slightly strained but still conversational. Is there a time limit on how long you can take to kill me? Because I've got places to be. Prill felt something she had never experienced before while watching a trial. She felt hope. The whispers in the gallery grew louder. Species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in confusion. The small human on the chamber floor was supposed to be dead by now. Instead, he was lying on his back at 2.5 times standard gravity, occasionally reaching into a bag of dried fruit with movements that looked like he was swimming through honey. Prill accessed her personal data device, her soft fingers moving across the surface with practice speed. She had never seen a human before today. Her knowledge of their species came entirely from official galactic records, which described them as recent arrivals from an unremarkable world in an unremarkable system. The records also said humans were fragile. The records were apparently wrong. 3 standard gravity units, Nolan announced. His compound eyes had not moved from Danny since the trial began. The Arbiter had stopped making predictions about when the human would die. That silence spoke louder than any words. Danny grunted as the pressure increased. His breathing changed, becoming slower and more deliberate. Each exhale was a conscious effort. Each inhale was a small victory. But he was still conscious, still moving, still reaching for that bag of dried fruit with stubborn determination that he remembered his childhood. The mining camps in northern Canada, where temperatures dropped so low that exposed skin would freeze in minutes. The endless days of carrying equipment across terrain that seemed designed to kill anyone foolish enough to walk on it. His father had called it character building. Danny had called it torture. But somewhere along the way, his body had adapted. His muscles had grown dense. His bones had thickened. His lungs had learned to work harder with less. Earth was not a gentle world. It was a planet of extremes, where survival meant fighting every single day against an environment that wanted you dead. Danny had never thought of himself as tough. He was just normal. But normal on Earth meant something very different than normal in the rest of the galaxy. You are suffering, Nolan observed. I can see in your movements. Your biological systems are under extreme stress. Yeah, Danny agreed, his voice strained. This really sucks. Then surrender. Accept death. End your suffering. Danny turned his head slightly to look at the Arbiter through the transparent barrier. The movement took several seconds and visible effort. No thanks. I've got snacks to finish. He ate another piece of dried fruit. Chewing was harder now. Swallowing was an act of will. But he did it anyway, because stopping would mean admitting defeat, and Danny Reeves had never been good at admitting defeat. That in the galleries, money changed hands again. The odds were shifting. Some spectators were leaving, unable to watch what they had expected to be a quick execution drag-on into something uncomfortable. Others were leaning forward, fascinated by a spectacle they had never witnessed before. Prill found information about Earth in the galactic database. The planet was classified as a Category 7 death world, which meant it was considered marginally habitable for most galactic species. The atmosphere contained a corrosive gas called oxygen. The surface experienced extreme temperature variations. Radiation from the local star bombarded the planet constantly. Gravity was considered heavy by galactic standards, And yet billions of humans live there, thrive there, considered a home. 3.2 units, Nolan said. His voice had lost its pleasant teaching tone. Now it carried something sharper. Irritation, perhaps, or something closer to uncertainty. Danny screamed. The sound was raw and honest. Pain shot through every part of his body. His ribs compressed against his lungs. His spine felt like it was being slowly crushed. Blood vessels in his eyes burst, turning the whites pink. His nose started bleeding. The galleries fell silent. This was what they had come to see. This was the moment of death they had been waiting for. But Danny did not die. He lay there, bleeding and broken and hurting in ways he had never imagined possible. And he did not die. His heart kept beating. His lungs kept working. His stubborn human body refused to give up because millions of years of evolution had designed it to survive things that should be impossible. How? Nolan's question was barely a whisper, but the gallery microphones picked it up. How are you still alive? Danny's response came in gasps, each word separated by desperate breaths. Earth is not a gentle world. He reached for the bag of dried fruit. His hand moved like it was pushing through concrete. The effort made fresh blood leak from his nose. But his fingers found a piece of dried mango, and he brought it to his mouth, and he chewed. The galleries erupted in noise. Some spectators were cheering. Others were arguing. A few were simply staring in disbelief at the small human who refused to die. Prill felt tears forming in her large amphibian eyes. She had watched many trials in this chamber. She had seen species beg for mercy, seen them curse their executioners, seen them die with dignity or without it. But she had never seen anyone do what this human was doing. She had never seen anyone eat snacks while being crushed by artificial gravity. 3.5 units, Nolan announced. His voice was cold now, all pretense of professionalism gone. Let us see how much more you can endure, human. Danny felt the pressure increase again. His vision was narrowing, darkness creeping in from the edges. But somewhere in the pain, he found something unexpected. He started laughing. It was a broken sound, more cough than laugh, but it was unmistakably amusement. The absurdity of the situation had finally reached him. He was being crushed to death by an angry insect, and his last act of defiance was eating dried fruit. His grandmother would have been proud. "You are insane," Nolan said. "Probably," Danny agreed. "But I'm still alive." The timer on the wall showed that 15 minutes had passed. 45 remained. 20 minutes into the trial, Danny stopped laughing. The pain had moved past anything he could mock or dismiss. Every heartbeat felt like a small explosion inside his chest. His blood moved through his veins like thick mud, fighting against gravity that wanted to pull it all down into his feet, that he focused on small things. The texture of the floor beneath his back, the distant murmur of the crowd, the weight of the snack bag on his stomach. These tiny details became anchors, keeping his mind from drifting into the dark places where pain lived. His father had taught him this trick during the long winters in the mining camps. When the cold became unbearable, when the work seemed endless, when every muscle screamed for rest, you found something small to focus on. A crack in the ice, the sound of wind against canvas, anything that reminded you that the world was larger than your suffering. Nolan watched through the transparent barrier with an expression that had shifted from confusion to something approaching concern. Not concern for the human, of course. Concern for himself. This trial was supposed to be simple. This trial was supposed to demonstrate Kathrani superiority. Instead, it was becoming something else entirely. 3.7 units, he announced. Danny felt his ribs creak. Not break, not yet, but creak like old wood under heavy weight. His diaphragm struggled to push against the pressure. Each breath required complete concentration. In, out, in, out. Simple actions made heroic through repetition. In the galleries, Prill had moved to a seat closer to the transparent barrier. Her large eyes were fixed on the human, and her personal device was streaming information about Earth that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Humans had survived ice ages. They had crossed frozen wastelands on foot. They had climbed the highest mountains on their world simply because the mountains existed. They had descended into crushing ocean depths in fragile metal containers. They ran impossibly long distances through deserts where water did not exist. They did these things voluntarily, for recreation, for sport. What kind of species did such things for fun? A Kathrani official approached Nolan through a side entrance that most spectators could not see. Their conversation was brief and sharp. Prill caught fragments through the gallery microphones. "This is becoming a problem," the official hissed. "I am aware. End it. Increase to lethal levels immediately. The trial has rules. 1 hour of survival means freedom. If I kill him before the hour ends without proper progression, we violate our own laws. Then progress faster." Nolan's compound eyes flickered in what might have been annoyance. "I am progressing as fast as protocol allows." The human simply refuses to die. Danny could not hear their conversation, but he could feel something changing in the room. The pressure of gravity was one thing. The pressure of politics was another. He understood, in some dim corner of his pain-addled mind, that his survival had become more than personal. It had become a statement. "Hey," he called out, his voice weak but audible. "How much time is left?" Nolan glanced at the timer. 38 minutes. "Cool." Danny tried to nod, but found that moving his head was no longer possible. "Just checking." He reached for the snack bag again. The movement was agonizingly slow. His arm felt like it weighed 100 kilograms. But his fingers found a piece of dried fruit, and he managed to bring it to his mouth. Chewing required rest breaks. Swallowing took 3 attempts, but he did it in the galleries. Something remarkable was happening. Species that had spent centuries as enemies found themselves united in a shared emotion. They were rooting for the human. Not openly, not loudly, but in the quiet way that beings root for the impossible when they witness it happening in front of them. A large reptilian spectator leaned toward Prill. "Your device. What else does it say about humans?" Prill scrolled through the information. "They heal from injuries that would kill other species. They form emotional bonds with almost anything. They domesticated wolves by treating them with kindness. They survived asteroid impact that killed most life on their planet." She paused. "They call their world Earth. It means dirt. They named their planet after dirt." "Yes." The reptilian made a sound that might have been a laugh. "They are either very humble or very strange. I think they are both." Danny was thinking about his grandmother. She had survived a building collapse during an earthquake when she was 17 years old. 18 hours under rubble, with broken bones and internal bleeding, waiting for rescue that she had no reason to believe was coming. She had told him the story many times during his childhood, usually when he complained about something minor like homework or chores. "The body wants to live," she would say. "The mind gives up long before the body does. So you do not let the mind give up. You focus on breathing. You focus on heartbeats. You focus on the next second, and then the second after that. And eventually, the seconds add up." Danny focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. For units, Nolan said. The pressure increased again. Danny felt something tear inside his chest. Not badly, not fatally, but enough to send a fresh wave of pain crashing through him. His vision was almost gone now, narrowed to a tiny circle of light surrounded by darkness. But in that tiny circle, he could still see the snack bag that he reached for it. His fingers were numb. His arm felt like it belonged to someone else. But somewhere, deep in the ancient parts of his brain that remembered what it meant to be human, a voice whispered that he could not stop. Would not stop, that he ate another piece of dried fruit. And in the galleries, Prill began to cry. 30 minutes had passed. Danny could no longer see the timer, but he could feel time moving in the slow rhythm of his heartbeat. Each pulse was a small victory. Each second survived was a second closer to freedom that he had stopped trying to eat. The snack bag still rested on his chest, rising and falling with his labored breathing, but the effort required to reach into it had finally exceeded his ability. His arms lay flat against the floor, too heavy to lift. His eyes stared at the ceiling without really seeing it. But his mouth was still moving. Words came out in fragments, broken by gasps and pauses, but they came out nonetheless. Danny was talking. To the crowd, to Nolan, to himself, to anyone who would listen. 33 miners, he said. Chile, 2010. Trapped underground. 69 days. The gallery translation systems picked up his words and broadcast them to every spectator. Most had no idea what he was talking about. Prill searched her device and found the reference. They survived, Danny continued. Underground. Dark. Running out of food. 69 days. Then rescue. Nolan watched in silence. The Arbiter had stopped announcing gravity increases. The pressure sat at 4 units, and even that small mercy seemed to cost him something. Ernest Shackleton, Danny gasped. Ship crushed by ice. Walked across frozen ocean. Everyone survived. Prill found that reference too. She shared the story with the reptilian beside her, who shared it with others. The information spread through the galleries like fire. Aaron Ralston, trapped by a rock, cut off his own arm, walked out of the canyon. The crowd was completely silent now. No one was eating. No one was chatting. Every eye was fixed on the broken human lying on the floor, bleeding from his nose and eyes, barely able to breathe, telling stories about his species with the last of his strength. Julianne Coepke fell 3 kilometers, survived the fall, walked through jungle for 11 days. These were not stories of technology, not stories of advanced weapons or powerful shields. These were stories of flesh and blood and bone, pushed beyond all reasonable limits and somehow continuing. Danny coughed. Blood came up with the sound, but he kept talking. Louis Samperini. Plane crashed. 47 days on a raft. Captured. Tortured. Survived. Nolan finally spoke. Why are you telling us this? Danny's answer came slowly, each word requiring immense effort. Because you need to understand what we are. You are dying. Yes. Danny almost smiled. But I am not dead yet. The timer showed 25 minutes remaining. Danny cannot see it, but he could feel it. The seconds were adding up, just like his grandmother had promised. Prill stood up. The movement was sudden, drawing attention from those around her. She accessed the tribunal's public communication channel, the one that allowed spectators to ask questions during trials. It was rarely used. Most trials did not last long enough for questions. Hi, Arbiter Nolan, she said. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. The rules state that survival for 1 hour means freedom. Is that correct? Nolan's compound eyes shifted toward her. Correct. And you cannot simply increase gravity indefinitely. There are limits to what the trial allows. There are protocols. Nolan's voice was cold. They are being followed. Then if this human survives for 25 more minutes, he goes free. If he survives, yes. Prill looked at Danny, then back at Nolan. He's going to survive. The statement hung in the air. It was not a prediction. It was a declaration. And something in Prill's voice made others start nodding. The reptilian beside her spoke up. He is going to survive. Another voice joined. He is going to survive. The chant spread through the galleries. Species that had conquered each other, fought each other, hated each other for centuries, found themselves united in a single message. They were cheering for the human. They were believing in him. Danny could hear it. Through the fog of pain and the weight crushing his body, he could hear them. Strangers who had come to watch him die were now calling for his survival. IT was the strangest thing he had ever experienced, and it gave him something he desperately needed: hope. For 0.2 units, Nolan announced. His voice was sharp now, angry. The chanting had clearly affected him. Danny felt the increase. His ribs definitely cracked this time, 2 sharp pains on his left side. His breathing became even more shallow, each inhale barely bringing enough air, but the chanting continued. And Danny, bleeding and broken and barely conscious, found the strength to reach for his snack bag one more time. His fingers touched the fabric. That was all he could manage. But it was enough. 20 minutes remaining. The timer announced automatically. Danny closed his eyes and focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. His grandmother had survived 18 hours. He only needed to survive 20 minutes that he could do this, that he would do this. Nolan stood before the control panel with his segmented limbs trembling. Not from fear. The Kathrani did not feel fear. But something close to it moved through his thoughts as he watched the human refuse to die .15 minutes remained on the timer. The galleries had transformed into something he did not recognize. Species that should have been celebrating the death of a trespasser were instead chanting for his survival. The sound echoed through the tribunal ring. A chorus of voices united in a way that made Nolan deeply uncomfortable. The Kathrani official appeared to decide again. The conversation was conducted in their native clicking language, hidden from the translators. "This cannot continue," the official said. "Our reputation is being destroyed in real time. Footage of this trial is spreading across every galactic network. I'm aware. The worlds we conquered are watching. They're seeing a human resist our greatest weapon for nearly an hour. They're seeing us fail." Nolan's compound eyes flickered. The human has not won yet. He does not need to win. He only needs to survive. And he is surviving. On the floor of the chamber, Danny lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. His eyes were closed. Blood had pooled beneath his head. His skin had taken on a grayish color that suggested his body was beginning to fail, but his heart was still beating. His lungs were still working. And somewhere in his damaged brain, consciousness clung to existence with desperate stubbornness. "For .5 units, Nolan announced. His voice carried across the galleries, silencing the chants for a moment. The pressure increased. Danny made a sound that was not quite human. Something between a gasp and a moan, a noise that came from the deepest parts of his body where pain lived without words. His cracked ribs shifted. His internal organs pressed against each other in ways they were never designed to handle. The medical monitors in the chamber showed readings that should have indicated death. Heart rate too slow. Blood pressure too low. Oxygen levels critical. By every medical standard known to the galaxy, Danny Reeves should have been dead, but human bodies did not follow galactic medical standards. Prill watched through tears that she no longer tried to hide. Her personal device had given her an understanding of what the human was experiencing. The pressure on his body was equivalent to having several hundred kilograms sitting on his chest. Every breath he took was a battle against physics itself. And yet he was breathing. 10 minutes remaining. The chanting resumed, louder now. The galleries had grown beyond their usual population. Word of the trial had spread, and beings from across the station had come to witness something unprecedented. They packed the viewing areas, standing in aisles and doorways, all watching the small human who would not die. Nolan faced a decision that would define his legacy. He could maintain the current gravity and watch the human survive, admitting defeat through inaction. Or he could push higher, risking violation of the trial protocols that his people had used for centuries. 4.7 units, he said. The crowd roared in protest. This was faster than protocol allowed. This was desperation disguised as procedure. Several spectators began shouting legal objections, citing rules that Nolan himself had invoked at the start of the trial. Danny felt the increase as a distant pressure, like a memory of pain rather than pain itself. His consciousness had retreated to a small, quiet place deep inside his mind. He was not really in the chamber anymore. He was in his grandmother's kitchen, eating cookies still warm from the oven. He was on his father's shoulders, looking down at a frozen lake. He was everywhere and nowhere, held to life by nothing but stubbornness. 8 minutes remaining. The official grabbed Nolan's arm. "Stop. If you violate protocol, the trial becomes invalid. He goes free regardless. He is going to die. Look at him. He has been going to die for an hour. He has not died yet." Nolan looked at the human, truly looked, for the first time, at the creature lying broken on the floor of his chamber. Small, weak by galactic standards, from a world considered barely habitable. And yet here he was, enduring pressure that would have killed any Kathrani within seconds. What kind of species produced such beings? 5 minutes remaining. The timer announced. The galleries had gone quiet again. The chanting had stopped. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting, watching. The only sound was the soft beep of the medical monitors and the terrible, rattling noise of Danny's breathing. Prill clasped her soft hands together. She had never prayed before. Her species did not have gods. But in this moment, she found herself wishing, hoping, begging the universe for a miracle. 3 minutes remaining. Danny's heart stopped. The monitors flatlined with a long, continuous tone that echoed through the sudden silence. The galleries erupted in shocked cries. Nolan raised his segmented limbs in what might have been victory. "The trial is over," he began, but he never finished the sentence because Danny's heart started again. One beat, then another, then a third. The flat line became a rhythm, weak and irregular but unmistakably alive. The medical monitors flickered back to their warning states. "That is impossible," Nolan whispered. Prill laughed through her tears. "He is human. Impossible is what they do." 2 minutes remained when Danny opened his eyes. He could not see much. His vision was a narrow tunnel of gray light surrounded by darkness. But somewhere in that tunnel, he could make out the shape of the timer on the wall. The numbers were blurry, but he understood their meaning, that he was almost there. His heart had stopped and started again. He knew this because he had felt it happen, a strange pause in the rhythm of his existence followed by a violent restart that felt like being punched from the inside. Human hearts were stubborn things. They did not give up easily, neither did Danny. 1 minute remaining, the timer announced. The galleries were completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone, gravity of a different kind. Nolan stood frozen at his control panel. His compound eyes were fixed on the human, watching for any sign that life was finally leaving that broken body. But Danny's chest continued to rise and fall, each breath shallower than the last, but still present. 30 seconds. Danny thought about home. Not the mining camps or the cargo ships, but the deeper home that lived in his bones. He thought about summer evenings when the sun refused to set, about the smell of pine trees and cold water, about his mother's voice singing songs he had forgotten the words to. He thought about everything he still wanted to do, places he wanted to see, people he wanted to meet, a life that stretched out ahead of him like an unexplored road. 20 seconds. His fingers twitched against the snack bag. He could not lift his arm, could not bring the dried fruit to his mouth, but he could feel it there. A small, silly thing that had become a symbol of something larger. 10 seconds. Prill was counting with the timer, her lips moving silently. Around her, others were doing the same. The reptilian, the other amphibians, species from dozens of worlds, all counting down together. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The timer stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then the gravity returned to normal, so suddenly that Danny felt like he was floating. His body, compressed for an hour under impossible weight, expanded with a sensation that was almost painful in its relief. He lay on the floor, unable to move, barely able to breathe, but very much alive. "The trial is complete," the automated system announced. "The accused has survived. By the laws of the tribunal, he is free." The galleries exploded. The sound was unlike anything Danny had ever heard. Cheering, crying, shouting in 100 different languages. Species that had come to watch an execution were celebrating a survival. The tribunal ring, a place built for death, had witnessed something that felt very much like birth. Prill was the first to enter the chamber when the barriers dropped. She moved carefully across the floor, her soft body not designed for quick movement, until she reached Danny's side. She did not speak. She simply sat beside him and waited. Medical teams arrived moments later. They surrounded Danny with equipment and scanners, their movements urgent but controlled. Someone placed a mask over his face that delivered pure oxygen. Someone else injected something into his arm that made the pain fade to a distant memory. "You should be dead," one of the medical technicians said. The translator gave his voice a tone of wonder. Danny tried to respond, but found that his voice had abandoned him. So he simply nodded, a tiny movement that was all he could manage. Over the next 3 days, Danny recovered in the station's medical facility. His ribs were repaired. His internal bleeding was stopped. The damage to his blood vessels slowly healed. Humans, the doctors discovered, were remarkably good at healing from injuries that should have killed them. Prill visited every day. She brought information about the aftermath of the trial, reading it to Danny when he was too weak to use his own devices. The footage had spread across the entire galactic network. Millions of beings had watched him survive. The Kathrani reputation as environmental masters had cracked, and the species they had conquered were beginning to ask questions that on the third day, Danny was finally able to sit up. His voice had returned, though it was rough and weak. He found Prill waiting by his bed with a small bag in her hands. "What is that?" he asked. She held out to him. "Dried fruit. I found a merchant who sold them. They are from Earth, apparently." Danny laughed. It hurt his ribs, but he laughed anyway. He took the bag and opened it, pulling out a piece of dried mango that looked exactly like the ones he had been eating during the trial. "Thank you," he said. Prill settled into the chair beside his bed. "I have requested transfer to serve as a cultural liaison with human space. I want to learn more about your species. We are not that interesting. You survived 4.7 times standard gravity while eating snacks. Your species is the most interesting thing I have ever encountered." Danny chewed slowly on the dried fruit. His jaw still ached, but the familiar taste brought comfort. "I guess when you put it that way." A week later, Danny stood at the viewing port of a transport ship heading toward human space. His body was healed, mostly, though the doctor said he might feel the effects of that hour for the rest of his life. Prill stood beside him, looking out at the stars with the wide-eyed wonder of someone seeing them for the first time. "You know," Danny said, reaching into his jacket for the bag of dried fruit, "I actually hate these things." Prill turned to look at him with obvious confusion. "They are too sweet and they stick to my teeth." He offered her a piece, but I was not going to give him the satisfaction of watching me stop eating. Prill took the dried fruit and tasted it. Her face twisted in what might have been displeasure. "This is terrible." "I know." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars go by, eating dried fruit that neither of them particularly enjoyed. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the galaxy, the story of the human who snacked through execution was being told and retold, a reminder that the universe was full of surprises, especially the ones that came from a small blue world called Earth.